Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Paley Television Festival. My name is Ron Simon, television curator back at the New York building. And tonight we have a very special evening. Few programs define an entire generation like the program we're saluting tonight, Schoolhouse Rock. The program from 1973 to 1985 was an Emmy Award-winning program that showed what television could do when it combined music and education. It was a program that influenced an entire generation. Anyone born, I'm sure, between 65 and 75 was influenced by the program and certainly learned math, science, grammar, history from Schoolhouse Rock. Also very interesting, it also was a precursor to the music video. In fact, was 8 years before the development of MTV, and certainly it came full circle this year when there was the Schoolhouse Rock songs were released on CD, and then Blind Melon's video played on MTV. So it was a nice circle that was complete. Tonight we have the creative team that was responsible for making Schoolhouse Rock and making it both from 73 to 85, and then as it was revived in 1992. What we're going to do is show, after I introduce the creative team, is show a group of about 10 videos, have a discussion, then show another group of 10 videos, and then open it up to your questions. And we'll be showing about 20 of the videos. I think there'll be about 50 altogether. So it's really a great pleasure to introduce now the creative team responsible for Schoolhouse Rock. First, I would like to introduce Radford Stone. He was Executive Vice President of Scholastic Rock, production company responsible for all the videos. He has a 40-year career in communications, including work with NBC, Ogilvy and Mather, and McCaffrey and McCall, the agency we'll hear a lot about tonight. Please welcome Radford Stone. One thing that permeates all the videos is the music of Bob Dorough. Bob's unique jazz styling really set the tone for Schoolhouse Rock and almost inspired the visuals. Bob is an accomplished jazz artist. In fact, you'll hear a lot of influence of Miles Davis, and he's also a performer. In fact, tonight, if you would like more of Schoolhouse Rock, Bob is going to be appearing at the Troubadour. So please welcome Bob Dorough. David McCall had a distinguished career in advertising. He learned the trade from the legendary David Ogilvy, but it was his son that sort of led him and inspired him to create Schoolhouse Rock. David McCall then went to his two creative directors to come up with the concept. Please welcome legendary advertising man David McCall. Now I'd like to introduce the team that were the executive directors of Schoolhouse Rock. They were responsible for the 2 runs of the series, and they were challenged by David to come up with a series, come up with a unique vision for television, and they did it. They also created their own company to create scholastic videos, the company Newell and Yulie, and they were responsible for a lot of award-winning programs. In fact, they won the Action for Children's Television Award for creating cartoons with conscience. And it's a great pleasure to welcome George Newell and Tom Yohe to introduce our program tonight.
That's George Newell. I'm Tom Yohe. Ron just told us a few moments before we came out here that we're responsible for introducing the, boy, it's bright, the initial videos, the clips that you're going to see.
These are the clips you're going to see.
And it's always been our contention that the clips speak for themselves, so this is going to be very brief. But I thought George could, since I see here that George is the composer of 3 of these. Is that right, George?
Well, I'd like you to think
two
I'm the
at least,
composer
I
of
think.
all of them, but I'm not.
Right. But I'm sure you're all familiar with Schoolhouse Rock, or you wouldn't be here this evening. So, and I think you'll certainly get an opportunity to ask us questions. So, unless George would like to say a few more words, we're just going to let you see the videos that the museum has pulled together, and then we'd be more than happy, after Ron conducts the first part of the questioning, to answer as many questions as you can throw at us. So.
Just enjoy these. I hope we recognize them when we see them. So.
Well, we were talking backstage. We'll talk about how Schoolhouse Rock got on the air. You all mentioned it's very much like Rashomon. You each will have a different version of the history, so we'll get to that. But we know it begins with David. You had a very successful advertising agency, Macaw, but the genesis of this began with your son. Could you talk about this?
Yeah, my son David was a bright little kid who knew the words to every rock song or contemporary song, whatever the word is, and he didn't know his multiplication tables. So I thought, why don't we, the whole thing started as a record idea. It was for kids who couldn't learn easily, and to get really great songs done, like, Sur le Pont d'Avignon. It's easy to remember when you're a little kid. So we tried to get these songs written, and it was not that easy. And we went to Mitch Lee, who had a great success on Broadway, and a year later, we still didn't have one good song. And then Bob Dorough came into the picture, and George Newell, who was one of our creative directors, and he said, I know a guy who could do this. And Bobby came back in not a very long time with all of the multiplication table songs, which are the most difficult of all. I mean, that's not easy. 3 times 3 is 9. I mean, And the rest just went on from there. Other people know the rest of the story better than I do, but that was the beginning.
Well, Tom or George, do you want to talk about, after hearing about
Well,
David's
as
son?
you say, everyone has a different angle. For me, Schoolhouse Rock proves the value of getting to work early. I used to go in every morning at 7, and the only other person in the office was our boss, Dave. And we'd have coffee and shoot the bull about current events. And it was in one of those...
Certainly not work.
Not work. Never work. And never talked about bad clients or anything like that. We just talked about...
One of whom is here.
One of whom is here. A client that we haven't seen for 30 years came here tonight in the hopes of finally learning how to multiply and pay bills on time, things like that. But at any rate, we had this discussion, and at the time, I was still playing jazz piano on weekends for a living, and I was hanging out to hear a wonderful jazz pianist, Billy Taylor. And his bassist at the time was a man named Ben Tucker. And Ben and I were talking between sets one time, and I said, who do you know who could do this stuff? And he said, I've got the guy for you. He's a partner of mine. He wrote a song based on that tag that's on your mattress that says, do not remove under penalty of law. So I knew immediately, not only would he probably be a pretty good songwriter, but he could also probably be in advertising. So Ben set it up, and that's really how it happened. And the thing is that one of the last songs you saw in those clips was 3 is a Magic Number. And I think that what David had heard before from these other big-name composers in New York City were pretty straightforward, 2 times 3 is 6, 3 times 3 is 9. I can't go any higher than that, but that's where, at any rate. But Bobby came back with a song that introduced so much more, and you hear his genius like in figure 8, turn it on its side, and it's a sign that means infinity. And we really, if there's a true genius behind the Schoolhouse Rock phenomenon, it's Bob Dorough. He's just an amazing guy.
Bob, could you talk about the music?
What do you think, Ron? Can I get a word in?
Yeah, okay. Well, could you do
Am I
one
on?
of that mattress song? That would be...
Yes, I am the composer of Do Not Remove This Tag. Well, so they made an appointment with the old man. Did you call him the old man?
I don't think so.
The Prez.
Not me.
The Prez.
Absolutely.
And I sort of knew Tom and George. I think I did write a jingle for you guys once or something.
For
Half
Bork
a
Warner.
jingle.
That's right.
Anyway, I went up to the office thinking, oh, he's going to give me Mercedes-Benz. I could see $9,000 going into my bank account.
Or a Mercedes-Benz.
Instead, he said, my little boy can't multiply, but he sings along with the Rolling Stones. And I said, where is this going? So why not put the multiplication tables to rock music and call it Multiplication Rock? Isn't that a good idea? I said, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll think about it. Yeah, that's a good idea.
And it became
But then he said, but don't write down to the children. Well, when he said that, you know, I could feel my hair standing up, thin as it is. I thought it was a great chance to tell the kids not only about multiplication, but Buckminster Fuller. Birth control.
suffrage.
Suffrage, things like that. So I did write 3 as a magic number, and we made a deal. Who knew where it would lead?
Now, how did it get to animation? How did you
Well,
were inspired to do the visuals then?
Bobby brought in 3 as a magic number, and we were all just absolutely knocked out by it because, as David mentioned, we had heard some other songs before that from some pretty good songwriters. Mitch Lee, who David mentioned, wrote Man of La Mancha, so they weren't bush leaguers. But Bobby came in with 3 as a magic number, and it had so much more in it, as we've all said, than just a recitation of the times tables. And his lyrics were so visual that I just took a stab. My background is art. David and George are copywriters. Rad is an account executive, and Rad really, when he saw my storyboard that I had done for 3 as a magic number, and we didn't know what we were going to do with it. As I said, Bobby's lyrics, a man and a woman had a little baby, or faith, hope, and charity, and so on and so forth, from that particular song were so visual that Rad saw the storyboard, and Rad was the account executive on what was then McCaffrey and McCall's biggest account, which was the ABC television account. We did all the tune-in advertising for ABC. And Rad, it was in the early 70s, and Rad knew that the networks were all sort of casting about for stuff they could hold up against the Peggy Charons and National PTA and so forth, because it was at that time that the networks were beginning to come in under a little bit of pressure to put more pro-social or educational programming on. And Radford set up a meeting with ABC, and why don't you tell where that led to, Rad?
Everything you say is correct. It was a great opportunity to do something sort of an extra for our biggest client at the time, and so we went to the head of ABC, the president of ABC, Jim Duffy, and set about organizing a meeting to show this new work and a possible programming idea for them. And they had just made a young man their head of children's television then. He's a young man who was 31 years old. He had a 1-year-old son, and that's about what he knew about children. And his name was Michael Eisner, the right man in the right place. And he had just taken over the job. He was just starting to do a program with an illustrious animator named Chuck Jones. And so they had a meeting, and Chuck Jones came along, and the guys showed him 3 as a magic number storyboard. And they said, this is it. Let's do it. And Chuck Jones was very positive about it, saying, be sure and do this and get this guy Yohe. And then we made, the song was 3 minutes and 15 seconds, and then what do you do with it? And at the time, on another network, they had a program on CBS called In the News for Kids, which was a separate little 2.5 or 3 minute program.
90 seconds, I think, Rad.
Was that all? Was that all? Anyway, it was a discrete thing, and they broke into their children's programming and put this on. So we suggested that maybe they might do that in various segments of their Saturday morning, and at the time they also had Sunday morning children's programming, and they did. And so then we were off writing more songs as fast as we could and get them on the air. It started in '73. These meetings happened in '71, but it actually started at the beginning of '73, and the rest, as they say, is history. It soon, it didn't take long before they say, all right, what else can you do? And that's when we got into grammar and parts of speech and on into history.
Could you talk about the connection between advertising and the development of these videos? Did that play a part? Did your background as advertisers play a big part in the making of these?
Why don't you take that, David? We can all talk about that because we're all still
Yeah.
in advertising.
Okay, we'll
We
have
haven't
five
quit the day
different,
jobs.
five different answers to this one, too.
Yeah, we have a lot of different.
I think, I mean, the skills that George and Tom had were very, obviously, very important to the development of Schoolhouse Rock, but we were also liberated from advertising, which was kind of neat. I mean, we didn't, the client, there was no client. We had fairly unlimited budgets because the shows ran so often. They were on, several hundred times each or more. And so we could really do stuff we wanted to do. And it was different from advertising.
The thing is that not only were we liberated from advertising, but also we were liberated from television. We weren't in the television business, so we could write what we thought made sense. We weren't worried about being picked up next year. We weren't worried about losing our jobs because we had jobs in advertising.
That's a very important point.
And that's a very important point.
We thought this was kind of a good thing to do, and I don't think anybody was in it for the money.
No.
And I think that's why part of the reason why the stuff was so excellent.
We were so thrilled to have a show on network television, and which probably caused us to not strike a very hard bargain with ABC, which has subsequently come back to haunt us. But at any rate, I wanted to say one thing, sitting out there in the audience. These things were made for the little television screen. David talked about an unlimited budget. It wasn't that unlimited, and it was fairly limited animation. And when you project it on a screen this large, I'm extremely conscious of the flaws. So I hope most of you didn't see those. But now they look like wonderful, nostalgic, primitive things. But anyway.
There's another thing. Red mentioned, the rest is history. Well, actually, Schoolhouse Rock has had two histories. It had that first history that started with Mike Eisner and ran until 1984 or 1985. And then it was taken off the air. And we do these kind of things fairly often, and we never get to spread enough credit around. And one of the reasons that so many of you are here tonight is that Schoolhouse Rock has had a rebirth. And that rebirth really started at ABC with a lady who's here tonight, and I'd love her to stand up, Jenny Trias, who put us back on the air.
Can we get her a good seat?
Yes. Needless to say, she's a woman of incredible taste, foresight.
Well, once you struck the deal with ABC, could you talk about the production process? How did you go about creating the videos? Did it always emanate first from the music? And how did you choose the topics that you were going to deal with?
They didn't have videos then.
Well, the first topic, there were no videos,
Yes.
of course, but so we were making a 3-minute television program. But the multiplication tables afforded us a template because it was determined that we'd make 1 through 12, but we didn't do 1, as you may recall, and we didn't do 10, we did My Hero 0. I'm saying we, Bobby did all of this. And Bobby would bring in one song after another and absolutely amaze us, and then either I would take it and do a storyboard or I would assign it to someone else. Because as someone mentioned, we were going furiously. Once Michael had approved the pilot, which was 3 as a magic number, and ordered the entire series, we had to pull out all the stops to get enough to go on air in the, was it January or February of
January.
73? January. So Bobby was writing furiously and recording music, and we were cranking out the animation. And still working in advertising, so we never quit the day jobs.
How did you do the animation? What was the process of?
Well, we'd do a storyboard, and then generally the person that did the storyboard, whether it was myself or Jack Sidebotham, who was also famous for doing Bert and Harry Peel. I don't know if you remember Peel's Beer. And, but the person who did the storyboard would also do the layouts, the animation layouts. Then we would turn it over to an animator and a fellow named Phil Kimmelman, who we are doing. You saw one of the new episodes. It was the little kid with the big tuba. It was one of the new Money Rock songs that Jenny commissioned. And I'm stumbling now, but we would then hand it over to an animator, and the animator would proceed until we had a finished film. And 3 minutes, of course, is a lot easier to do than a half hour or a 21-minute segment that most of the Saturday morning programs are.
With multiplication, Bob, you were doing everything. You were composing, you were singing. Could you just talk about the inspiration for some of the songs?
Well, let's see, I just tried to get a new idea for each number, and I would take them one at a time. And we threw out a few of my songs. They weren't all perfect, G's.
Pretty close to all.
I had one called Do Your Sevensies.
Talking down to the children.
Yeah, I was talking down to the children. But David just mentioned that the last song was his favorite, Figure 8. And I used to play that on my piano at my home, and my wife, my late wife, would say, "What is that?" I said, "Oh, that's, maybe it's a song about 8. She said, "Oh, that's too pretty for Schoolhouse Rock." And I'd say, "Yeah, I guess you're right, because it is a rather atypical melody." But I kept working on it, and I thought, oh yeah, Figure 8 is so beautiful. So finally one day I got up the nerve to bring it to the guys, and they loved it. And I figured that I was a very lucky cat, because they were all so open-minded and liberal and talented. And
We didn't know any better, right?
You didn't know any better.
As David said, we had no clients. There was,
Yeah,
there was
clients.
no one not to like it. He loved it all.
I was in it for the money, actually. They always say I was the only guy getting paid. But I wrote
Not enough.
When I wrote Little 12 Toes, I knew they'll never like this. It's too far out. The concept of a creature from outer planet who has 6 fingers on each hand. Therefore, why would he multiply by 10? He would multiply by 12. 1 0 would be 12. The duodecimal system. So I brought that in, and I thought, this will never float. But they bought that too.
They didn't understand it, but they bought it.
We actually ran into a few snags with that one. Michael Eisner, by the way, thought it was a little too advanced for kids. But we had a wonderful mathematician at the Bank Street School of Education in New York, and they were our consultants, Dorothy Bloomberg. Yeah. And Dorothy convinced Michael that it's always better to challenge kids, and Michael said, fine, go ahead with it. So.
It was funny, some of the problems we had, one was with Suffering Till Suffrage, which was a wonderful song. And somebody who'd succeeded Michael in the children's programming department said, "That's pretty radical." I said,
Women voting?
I said, women started voting in 1920, and let's get with it.
One of the other songs that I thought David was going to refer to, there's one called 3-Ring Government, and ABC didn't put it on right away because they were a little concerned about the analogy between a 3-ring circus, and it's very strong in the film, if you know the film. It does compare government, the executive, judicial, and legislative branches to a 3-ring circus, but...
That was the original title.
That's right.
3-ring circus. Yeah.
We had one song that never got produced. It was written by Dave Frischberg, who did I'm Just a Bill, among other things, and is a wonderful composer and a longtime collaborator with Bobby. And when we started the project of doing a song about verbs, Dave had this concept of a world without verbs. And he brought us this song, A World Without Verbs. Well, nothing would happen. I mean, you just sit there. And
Right.
when Eisner heard about that one, I think he envisioned like 3 minutes of dead air. Yeah. And so Bobby, picking up on his very hip musician factor, said, "I'll write one called Verbs on What's Happening."
Now, did you know from the beginning, with your relationship with ABC, these programs were catching on, that the audience just loved them? Radford, what were your conversations like with Michael Eisner?
Well, Eisner was succeeded, as I said, by somebody else, and then somebody else, and then somebody else. We went through about 4 regimes, and I guess at least 4 in the 13 years that it was on. up until 1985. But there was always the network. The original concept was to just take multiplication, make them what you call evergreen, so that you could play them this year, and then you have a new batch of kids come along in 3 or 4 years, and then be recycled, and you just keep playing them, evergreen. And but the network mentality, or at least what happened, was they said, all right, this is okay, what are you going to do next? And that did lead to grammar, and then the next programming guy came in, and it was about the time of it was exactly 20 years ago, in fact, 1976, and said, well, let's do history stuff about the bicentennial and the history of the thing which became America Rock. And we did 10 of those, and then we were looking for another discipline, and actually there was a 4th programming executive, and that's how science came up as an area to cover. One thing that Tom reminded me of here is mentioned Bank Street College of Teachers in New York. They were our advisor on multiplication, and for each of the sub-series we had, before the songs were written, we went to people knowledgeable in that field. Basically, they were actually teachers of teachers, to get the ideas. We're going to do some songs about grammar. What do we write about? And then when you write about adverbs, what is it that you want to put in them? There was a lot of guidance to cram those all that learning into the 3 minutes, and that still obtains today. And all the songs that we write are sort of pre set up by advisors.
Of those 4 categories, what was the most challenging? Which one was more difficult than you thought it would be?
Science.
Science.
For
So,
me,
you'd have to ask the songwriters that. Yeah.
The songwriter.
I would certainly think it would be multiplication, as David said, but for some strange reason, Bobby was able to work within that rigid format of having to
well, actually, we had less direction in those days. We did have the approval of the Bank Street College, but after they were written, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was more or less my domain. He said, put the multiplication tables to music, and I just got busy. But since that time,
Those were the days.
we more, yeah, I love it. Now we have they pass out the titles to the different writers, and they're approved in front, or the scripts are approved. But I had a pretty much free hand with multiplication. That's why it's my favorite series.
I know.
Numbers are so precise, you can't mess them up.
Well, there are a lot fewer decisions to make when you're working with finite things like numbers than there are when you get into science or social studies. It's very difficult.
One of the reasons we went on to grammar is that we thought, where do we go from here? And I remember the conversation with Michael, and we decided that there were 8 parts of speech, so that seemed to provide another discipline. Unfortunately, we only did 7 parts of speech. We had never done prepositions because the bicentennial came along, as Radford mentioned, and they said, now let's not do preposition. Let's go ahead and do, all the America Rock. So for many years, for almost 20 years, we only had 7 parts of speech. And finally, when Jenny put Schoolhouse Rock back on the air, Jenny said, well, at least let's finish up Grammar Rock. And Bobby had a wonderful old dusty preposition song that we pulled out and we produced, and also produced one new one called The Tale of Mr. Morton, which is about subject and predicate.
Hey. I noticed in the videos that, like Hitchcock would appear in his film, you would see your last names appear sometimes in the film.
Yeah, Tom was complaining about the size of the screen. During the bicentennial year, a producer named Bob Yohe produced a spectacular show at Radio City Music Hall and called to ask us if he could borrow some footage from Schoolhouse Rock. And so we said, sure. And one day the phone rang and he said, come on over and look at this. And Tom and I actually went to Radio City Music Hall and had a private screening of Schoolhouse Rock on this 10-story screen. And Newell Tool is huge on that. Unbelievable.
Well, should we now show our second round
Let's
of
do it.
clips? Do you want to talk?
Don't stand up.
No.
I'm wild.
First, do you want to talk a little
Let
bit about
Let
Tom?
me just look at
What
this
to look
briefly,
for,
because
yes.
I think the before when we just vamped and said there's nothing for us to say. It speaks for itself. I just wrote down all the flaws in the animation. I think these are all. Oh no, there are a couple of new ones here. There's one called Taxman Max, and that's one of the ones that Jenny commissioned. And but the rest are interjections, and the rest are all great.
Before we take questions, I'd like to ask you one question. Was there one point when you knew that Schoolhouse Rock would become a cultural phenomenon? You'd be doing seminars, and alternative bands would be doing the music. Was there one time when you said, "Oh, it's caught on, everyone knows it"?
I don't think we had any idea until Tom went to Dartmouth.
In 1990, April of 90, we were asked to, apparently Dartmouth has a thing called a senior symposium every year, and they take a broad generic topic like government or ethics, or in this particular year, 1990, they chose education, and I guess the committee was sitting around saying what had an impact on us as kids, and they all agreed that Schoolhouse Rock had. So I went up there, and there was how many does this auditorium hold?
600, yes.
They took me into the largest auditorium on campus that held 900, and I thought, this is really great. We're going to get about 6 kids here. And they filled the auditorium, and that was the first time that I knew that, it just struck me that, wow, we really had an impact on this entire generation. But before that, we thought it was clinically dead when it was taken off the air in 85.
How about you, Bob?
I actually had a little inkling that it might be great someday, because Christmas of 1973, there I was watching television every Saturday morning. I was watching television, but I got to saying, gee, is anybody watching this? I'm on television. So I got out the yellow pages and I called up about 13 schools in Manhattan. And I said, this is Bob Dorough. I'm with ABC, and we have an assembly program for you. And they would say, well, we don't have any money. Well, this is free, a Christmas present. So I scheduled about 13 concerts in elementary schools all over Manhattan. Some were rich and some were poor. And they said, well, what do you need? Just a mic and a piano. Okay. And I would arrive and sit down. It might be 8 a.m. or 1 p.m. And I would open up with, 3 is a magic number. And I'd look out and all the little kids would say,
That's the guy.
they knew it was me. They got to grow up someday.
Well, one question we have to know, David, did your son learn multiplication?
Well, the amazing thing is that little twerp today is a managing director of Bear Stearns, so I think he did.
Probably has a great calculator.
Yes. Well, he sings a lot.
Okay, well, who would like to ask the first question? Right in the front row, yes.
2 things. First of all, I'd like to start out by saying that I feel terribly deprived that I grew up before Schoolhouse Rock was on the air. But one thing I want to know is, besides you, Bob, somebody that I always thought had a very unique vocal sound was in what seems to be 2 of the most popular episodes, which is Who's Jack Sheldon? And I wondered who picked Jack, how did Jack get involved?
Bobby.
Bobby picked Jack.
Why don't you tell, Jack was an old friend of Bobby's.
Well, he's one of my jazz colleagues. I once lived in L.A., and that's where Jack lives. So I think it was when we recorded Conjunction Junction, and I'm Just a Bill. That was Dave Frischberg's first song for our group. And I'm the musical director, so I always arrange and supervise the audio recording. So George and I decided we would come to L.A. and record Jack Sheldon.
Oh, you mean a free trip? That
Free
I did.
trip.
It was on you, David. So we came out to L.A., and I knew my way around, and I booked the hottest band we've ever had on Schoolhouse Rock. I guess it was an all-star jazz band. Leroy Vinegar on bass. Nick Ceroli, the late Nick Ceroli, on drums. Dave Frischberg himself on piano. That was the first time I gave up my piano chair, because he's such a great player. And we had Jack Sheldon on trumpet, And we had Teddy Edwards on tenor. And man, that was so good. And I arranged them both, Conjunction Junction and I'm Just a Bill. And we did 2 songs in just the usual 3 hours that I usually take for one song. I think our recording budget is quite ample. 3 hours for a 3-minute song. I loved it. This time we got 2. And ever since then, they fell in love with Jack's voice, and he's probably our most used singer now. Huh? Mm-hmm. He's probably got more vocal tracks than anyone. I would also like to say that on that day when we finished the tracks and the cats went home, and Jack did his vocal, and his son did the little boy who says, "Whew, you sure got to climb a lot of steps to get to that Capitol Hill building." That was John Sheldon. And my friend Terry Morrell was sitting in the studio. She likes to hang out with me, and she's a great singer. And I said, "Terry, the song's not complete, Conjunction Junction. You know, Jack does hooking up words, and we got to do the rest of it. Just get out there, Terry, and sing Conjunction Junction, what's your fun?" She did. Terry Morrell. So that's that story, Terry Morrell and Jack Sheldon. Now we bring Jack to New York.
That's right.
At great expense.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, whatever became of Lynn Ahrens, who wrote the preamble?
Oh, she's doing quite well, huh?
Yeah, Lynn, I think all of the female vocals you heard there were Lynn. And she...
Blossom sang.
Figure 8.
Yeah, Blossom sang Figure 8, that's right. But Lynn's an interesting story because she worked at McCaffrey and McCall, started there as a secretary in the copy department. And she started writing radio commercials for one of our clients, and we made her a copywriter. And one day Tom spotted her walking down the hall with a guitar case in her hand and said, "What are you doing with that?" So she took it out and showed him. And she sang a song that she had written. And I still remember the song. It was called "You're Just a Phase." And it was a wonderful concept. Having been a phase many times in my own life. But it was a great concept. And so I don't know which one of us said it, but one of us, or maybe both of us in unison, said, "Well, why don't you write us a song for Schoolhouse Rock?" And she wrote "A Noun is a Person, Place, or Thing." And then went on to write many of the wonderful songs you've heard there, including the preamble. And years later, Clockwipe, right? 30 years later, I'm sitting in my office at the agency that Tom and I were working at the time, and a woman came in and said, "Are you George?" "No, yes." And she said, "Well, I've been looking for you and Tom Yohe because I just want you to know that I couldn't have gotten my United States citizenship without the preamble song." And she was a woman who was, actually, she was Canadian, but she said that when she went downtown in New York to prepare for the test, the immigration people recommended to all these great American melting pot people that they go out and get the Schoolhouse Rock cassette and the America Rock cassette and study on that. And of course, Lynn has gone on now, and she collaborated last year with Alan Menken in a production of A Christmas Carol at the Paramount Theater in New York, and has been
She's had several musical
very,
comedies.
very, very successful. And she wrote, the last song she wrote for us was in that last clip, Taxman Max. And
She
you
still
can
works
certainly
for us
hear,
occasionally.
that's right, and you can certainly hear the Broadway influence in that song.
Yes.
As being a product of both the public and private school system, not here in Los Angeles, I discovered that many years after the fact that myself as well as my peers did not learn their multiplication tables, American history, etc. in the classroom, but watching these little 3-minute cartoons sandwiched around Hong Kong Phooey and Last Seas also among my peers right here. Can you please comment about this failure of education, regardless of who's at fault, either the student or the school?
I don't know that there's a failure of education. I think that, although if you read the newspapers, you read that there is every day. I'm not sure that the things that we've done for television could be universally adapted to the classroom. But you know, just the fact that they are unusual and that they were on an unusual venue. They were in a place where kids were watching. You have to remember, kids didn't tune in to see Schoolhouse Rock. they tuned in to see Scooby-Doo. And Schoolhouse Rock just kept coming at them 5 times every Saturday morning. And it came at them in a wonderful way, but it was memorable, and it was in a setting, when you go to school, you just know, oh, wow, I'm in school, I have to learn. When you're home and it sounds entertaining. Oh.
I have a political opinion, as usual. I think that the fact that these went on the air at all, as somebody alluded to earlier, was because there was pressure from Washington. And the day that a former governor of California was made president of the United States, the pressure came off. And there's been no effort that I've seen to have really good television, educational television. And I think the lovely thing about these little programs, they prove that you not only can educate children, but they love it. And why not try for more?
I think also, I think now, not in its initial run, but more and more teachers are using these videos in the classrooms now because they have the necessary equipment in the classrooms to run videos.
Yes, way back there. Yeah.
Well, you say you're wrong. We did tune in just for Schoolhouse Rock.
Thank you.
That surprises me. I'm still surprised by that.
But, personally, I want to thank you for the videos because I watched every single one of them as a child, and that's how I learned all about adverbs, and I correct people singing lolly, lolly, lolly to them. They get annoyed, but I get it out of my system. I want to know if you guys, did you make a concerted effort to get the minorities and the women in there? Because a lot of your videos, there's minorities of every race, creed, color. There's a lot of women. I mean, the 19th Amendment one obviously is very pro-feminism in that era where it was a really big issue. Was that something you consciously decided to do, or did it just kind of happen based on the personalities of who was creating it?
I think we, speaking for myself, I learned my lesson early on. The second film we produced, as I recall, was My Hero Zero. And we all worked at McCaffrey and McCall for David, and I remember we had a little stockholders meeting one time, and one of our attorneys, who was a real, he and his wife had both gone to Harvard together, and when they got married, he changed his name and took her name. He became Mark Feigenfesto, I remember, and she became Brenda Feigenfesto. And he came up to me and asked me why My Hero Zero wasn't a woman. Well, the thought had never occurred to me that a little superhero would be a girl. And I think from that point on, I know I became very aware of trying to balance girls and boys in different roles. And certainly we constantly tried to get a good ethnic balance as well.
I told you they were some hip guys. Hip guys.
In sheep's clothing.
Yes, right here.
I'm just wondering, what's on now that you guys like educationally? Because there was a point there where they were saying stuff like Power Rangers was educational because it taught kids gymnastics. I'm sure that made you want to strangle somebody. But I'm wondering, what do you like now? What's good on TV now that teaches kids, in your opinion?
Gee, the ball game was pretty good today. I don't know if I'm really qualified to, I don't really watch. I think what you're referring to, a year or so ago, when the new Television Act came, and networks, or all stations, are supposed to put on 3 hours of educational programming a week, everybody started saying that every program they had for kids was educational. They were saying that the reruns of the Jetsons were educational and so forth, for one reason or another, because they taught about aliens or something. But I'm not that familiar.
When I watch my grandchildren in action, I think the videos have taken over where television is left off. I think that they see a lot of good stuff on video cassettes. I don't think they see much good stuff on television.
Yes, right here.
What were some of your favorite in-jokes, and were any of the animated figures based on you?
There were many. kept watching. In Interplanet Janet, I don't know if you remember the little trio. I don't know where that was, but George was playing the piano there. But throughout all of these, we kept, as George said, there are a lot of signs, and we're very embarrassed by these things now, because you look at 5, 10, 15, 20, and the kids are wearing Camp Yohe and Camp Newell t-shirts. But there were a lot of in-jokes, and Jack Sidebotham, who designed a lot of these, was the guy that usually he'd stick Macaw in there and stick Newell at the piano and so on and so forth. So
Shameless self-promoter.
that's right. We just had a lot of fun doing it. It was really we were out to entertain ourselves as much as anything. Bobby talked about not writing down to kids, and all we tried to do, and I think this is where Ron asked before about our advertising discipline. As an art director, you're used to taking a copywriter's words and trying to visualize them and in as strong a fashion as you possibly can, to use graphics and pictures and so on and so forth to make the copywriter's headline and body copy really come across. We did the same thing here. I would take George's or Bobby's lyrics or the other. Every guy that did storyboards was an advertising art director, so he knew how to make words come to life. And I think all of the lyrics work visually. Because I know a couple of times I tried to give lyrics to animators to do, and they didn't think like advertising men. They drew very well, but they were missing that in-between step where they could really make the lyric work as hard as it had to.
And the effect of the lyrics themselves were a product of advertising thinking, because that's what you do in advertising. You take some complex subject, a car or something, and you have to boil its essence down into 30 seconds. And that's a difficult discipline. Not everyone can do that. And Bobby certainly has that ability, and it's coming up with those concepts like a conjunction junction or an unpack your adjectives or a store where adverbs are sold. They're analogies that are easily grasped and can be repeated endlessly without seeming to wear out.
Yes, right here.
I'm glad that you brought up the preamble, because everybody always talks about I'm just a bill and conjunction junction, and I vividly remember being in government class during our final and having the entire class break into singing the preamble. And this is in Orange County in California, which is pretty, Republican, and my teacher had to say, "What are you singing?" He had no idea what it was, but I just had to tell you that because that's a true story, and it surpasses all the whole, I'm just a bill thing. But have you seen the Broadway show yet?
Well, we're naturally, the Broadway show was put on by the people who had originally done it in Chicago. And it ran for 2 years in Chicago, and it was wonderful. And it was just a review with 22 of our songs in it. It ran on Broadway for 2 years, and it was still doing very, very well. And I don't know, I think they just got tired of not being in Chicago. So they took it back, and they ran it in Chicago. And we made a deal with a company called Music Theater International. And it's a company that makes musical plays available to theater groups around the country. And right now, there are probably 25 productions of Schoolhouse Rock Live going. And I was telling Tom, because I hadn't seen him for a couple of days, 2 days ago, Scott Ferguson, who is the director of Schoolhouse Rock Live, called and asked me if we'd consider letting him do Schoolhouse Rock Live. And so naturally, I said no, because if he couldn't talk, no, he wants to do Schoolhouse Rock Live #2 to use the songs they didn't put in the first production, and run that in Chicago concurrently with Schoolhouse Rock Live #1. So it's astonishing.
Back there.
First of all, did you have any problems ever run into problems with some of the issues with standards and practices? And second, do any of you have any comments about the Simpsons parody, "I'm Just an Amendment"? It was a flag-burning amendment where they said those liberal freaks go too far, so you have to amend the Constitution?
We thought it was great, but Tom can give you some interesting, I'm thinking the one in Gravity, interesting examples of standards and practices affecting educational material.
I was thinking that when Gravity played in the first group, and when the piano came down, the safe came down, and so on and so forth, we were told that their standards and practices had counted 23 overt acts of violence in the Gravity film, and we said, "What do you mean?" We did well, all those things falling down, and we said, "That's gravity." And they settled it by cutting it down to 22. I think we had to take out one thing falling, and
we had the same experience with Naughty Number 9. Remember?
Oh,
Naughty
that's
Number
right.
9 was one of my very favorites because it was sort of a Tom and Jerry with this poor little mouse was getting hit by pool balls. And, I mean, every kid's delight. And that had many more than 26.
Well, the thing, and Michael Eisner really went to bat, as you may recall, the fat cat, the pool player, is smoking a cigar. And of course, that would never be in a kid's animated program now. But we said that's what makes him naughty. Or it was Michael that told the BS&P people that's what makes the cat so naughty. So at any rate.
Any comments about The Simpsons? The second.
Well, flattery is always the.
Something like that.
No, that's right. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery or something.
No, the scariest thing that ever happened with I'm Just a Bill was a letter we got from the Speaker of the Mississippi Legislature asking us if we'd send down a few copies of it because they were indoctrinating their freshman legislators. And now we've got Trent Lott. I guess we did that.
We also got a call from the NYU Medical School asking to borrow telegraph line. So when when I got hit by a cab, the ambulance driver said, "Where do you want to go?" I said, "Bellevue."
Yes, back there.
I just wanted to say, first of all, your comment about always not wanting to talk down to the children, how significant that theme was in your stories and animation and so on. Could you just comment on that? I mean, it seems to me so much of educational programming, or what's called educational programming nowadays, animated series and so on, are really underestimate the intelligence of children out there and their ability to absorb like these. I mean, even us as an audience of adults watching these cartoons, I think, really think, God, what a broad theme or concept about America being a melting pot, or a man and woman have a baby, or the infinity, and so on. These themes, are they all, was it a collaborative effort, or was it through Bob's songs, or what, or how did that come about?
Whoa, did you really say that to me, David? Or?
Well, I take credit for it.
That's the story I always tell.
I'm thrilled with the thought.
Words to that effect, at least. Do you remember?
Well, I think we were all young enough in those days, so we remembered not liking being talked down to ourselves. And children are very bright. I mean, they really are very bright.
They're getting brighter.
Yeah, they're getting brighter. Mm-hmm. And it was an overriding thought, but it was Bobby who translated that thought into wonderful life.
That's what I was going to say. I think it was up to the individual songwriter to come in with a song that he was proud of, that wasn't condescending, and Bobby certainly did it with multiplication, and subsequently everybody did it. Yeah.
We, in the very early part of Schoolhouse Rock, we were, one of our sponsors was General Foods, and they would run cereal commercials. And their agency for these cereals was an agency called Benton and Bowles, which doesn't exist anymore. And one day we got a phone call, and the General Foods people wanted us to talk to the Benton and Bowles people and tell them, give them the secret that you were asking about. What do you do? And so, 9 suits showed up and sat in a big room and started talking about research and parameters and all those words I've never understood.
Shelf space.
Yeah, and what it came down to is, what is your formula? What is it that makes it so successful? And I remember telling him, you hire Bob Dorough. You know, this isn't by plan. This is in someone's mind, and it just comes out that way. And that's what makes him extraordinary and makes him able to afford that jacket that he's got on.
He likes my clothes.
Yes, right here.
Yeah, I know you guys were talking a lot about being ethnically conscious and everything. And I just want to know why you made Chubby Checker white.
I think that was one of those flaws that I was talking about earlier. Yeah, there are several things that.
Oh, that Chubby Checker.
There are several things that that in today's climate we would not. Manifest destiny is one of the lines that's in Elbow Room, and we certainly would not do that again because I think we've all become much more aware of how we stole this land from the Indians. But
Native American.
Anyway, Native American. Thank you.
See, it goes on all the time.
Yes, right here.
I want to thank you. My son grew up with your songs, but I wanted to know, do you have any plans of doing anything currently? Is there anything that's going to be happening for the kids of today that would be as good or better with all these rules and regulations and overriding everything? And I mean, we have learned so much since the 70s.
Well, we're back on the air again, thanks to Jenny Trias, as we mentioned, and we are making about 2 or 3 new episodes each year. We're doing a series on money now, which we've almost finished. And there are some pretty interesting songs in that. We just did one called Tyrannosaurus Debt. It's about the national
Written
debt.
by the speaker, I might say.
And that just started airing last week. And there's one about Wall Street, and George has just written one. 7, still on ABC, yeah.
Bugs Bunny.
So, and we hope to go into geography after this, because we keep hearing that kids don't know where Los Angeles is. So. Right?
It's usually a connecting flight.
Yes, way back there.
Can one submit material to you? And also, do you plan to do social issues as well as more academic ones?
You take that, George.
Well, as Tom said before, I'm going to do a real cop-out here. We all have day jobs, and one of the, this is a recurring theme. One of the strengths of our series is that we're not grinding it out because we're in the television business, and we just do it one step at a time, and we do it with the people that we love to work with and who have proven that they can do it. It's interesting because one of the things that kind of worried us, even when Jenny called us and said, we want to put you back on the air. And we said, fine. And she said, and I want you to do more material. And we said, well, what do you want us to do? Schoolhouse rap? You want us to, bring this up to date, hip hop this thing? And she said, no, I want you to do what you did because they're timeless and they last. And I think, in terms of where we're going, we're going to just keep going with our little ship here and keep rowing and hope that we can continue to turn out great material. But we're not, if we were a big corporation, if we were a big, production facility, yeah, we'd be soliciting ideas from people, but we really don't do that. So.
But we encourage you to do your own thing.
Yeah. There's a lot of room, and and hopefully there's going to be more and more demand for this kind of material. So.
Yes, right here.
Did ABC give a reason why they took it off the air in 1985?
Because Menudo was going to sweep the nation.
Mary Lou Retton.
We've never forgiven it.
I think it was a combination of things, but David is right. They put on Menudo. They started slipping other things into our 3-minute time slot. And then it was finally, the kiss of death was Mary Lou Retton, who, after she won the Olympic gold medal, ABC made little, not you, Jenny, but ABC made little 3-minute exercise things, and they were dropped into the Schoolhouse Rock slots. And I don't think you probably tuned in to watch those and exercise with Mary Lou Retton. And I think also Reagan was in office. David didn't mention him by name. Former governor of California. And there was deregulation. There was less emphasis on putting on good, worthwhile programming, as there had been pressure back in the 70s. In the 80s, that pressure disappeared, and it was back to the same old thing. So.
Yes, right here.
I'd like to know, first I'd like to say, just so you can understand how much this transcends our generation, that you can't have a college conversation nowadays at 1 o'clock in the morning without breaking into some Schoolhouse Rock song. But I'd like to know, I remember that there were other things on ABC at the same time, other 3-minute programs, some about food, other little subjects. Did you have anything to do with that?
Well, we did some of them. Tom and I did several series of like nutrition spots and things like that. Lynn, when Marilyn Nolan was at ABC, did a series called Alex and Annie that were dropped into that 3 minutes. So there were quite a few others. Tom and I also did some for NBC. We had a show on NBC one year called Drawing Power, which won an Emmy for Best Animation, but that was the year of that election. And I remember I was in an airplane going to Boston to get an award from Peggy Charon when the head of children's programming at NBC said, by the way, don't tell Peggy, but we're not renewing you. Okay.
Yeah, we did win so many Emmys for a while that I mean, we weren't without vanity. We went to the Emmy Awards and we didn't win. We were outraged.
Yes, right here.
Yeah. Bob, as far as being a songwriter, do you own the copyrights to the songs that were in the series, and do you draw royalties on those? And is there other material that we would know that you've written or are writing?
Are you a lawyer?
No. Actually, the Schoolhouse Rock songs are owned by the network, I believe, right?
Yeah.
And but I do make money through the Performance Society, ASCAP in this case. I'd like to have it all, but now that it's recorded on a phonograph record, I think I might get royalties for that. But I have other compositions that have done very well for me. Let's see, I wrote Coming Home Baby with Ben Tucker, the bass player who brought me to George. And I wrote Devil May Care, recorded by Miles Davis, and Nothing Like You. And have I got any other hot songs, guys?
All your songs are hot.
I publish my own songs, not the Schoolhouse Rock.
Busy.
Yes,
right there.
A quick, technical question. I know that you were talking about Bob would write the song and then the animation, Tom, you would take it and create it. But how did it go to the point where you'd re-record the songs and have like the different voices, the narration, and was there an editor, or how did the post part work exactly?
Well, what we would normally, Bobby generally comes in with a very, very rough piano demo. And based on the piano demo that Bob does, we'll send that to the network and they'll say yay or nay. And then Bobby will arrange the song. So everything is pretty much done up front. Now, we do, the wonderful thing about working with Bobby, he's very receptive to ideas. And if we say, gee, wouldn't it be nice if we spoke this part because I envision a tour guide doing the spoken part or something like that. Bobby tells the story, I've forgotten it, but apparently when he brought in Elementary, My Dear, 2 times 2 is 4, the Noah thing wasn't in it, and I guess I suggested that, at least as Bobby tells the story. That's what I learned when we did this seminar in New York. And I was delighted to hear that because it was, Bob brought in a song, which was a very good song, but I had a visual idea that I thought if Bob maybe had some other references to Noah. So he wrote a whole introduction about 40 Days and 40 Nights.
Noah's Ark.
Yeah. But we have a full song because the animators pretty much need a full song to get their animation counts from before we can really start animation. We start drawing as soon as we have approval on the rough demo, but we really need the finished song before we can do animation.
There are some final overdubs or sound effects.
Yeah, every now and then we do sound effects or stuff like that.
Yes.
What is the process from boards to actually getting it to film, and what sort of animation? Is it traditional cell or?
Yeah, when we first went back a few years ago and did Mr. Morton and Prepositions and one other, which I can't remember, Dollars and Cents.
Dollars and Cents.
Dave Frischberg's song. We still, drew and did all the animation pencil drawings, but then the pencil drawings were scanned into the computer and colored. So we finished in the computer, but we didn't care for the look. I didn't. The colors were too electric, and we didn't have any cells when we finished either. Not that we've done anything with the cells. All of the original cells were thrown out. Who was to know? So, and they were big and heavy and in these cumbersome boxes that were breaking apart, and we kept moving them around the McCaffrey and McCall agency, and they were upstairs and down in the basement, and finally someone said, "Get these things out of here." So they were all chucked. But after we did those initial three, now we're back to conventional cell animation again. So we're inking and painting. Actually, you don't ink any longer. You take your pencil drawings and they're Xeroxed onto cells. But then you paint in the conventional way on the back of the cell.
Really kind of washy or whatever? Is there a different process?
Well, that was a song that George wrote, to unpack your adjectives. We colored with magic markers directly on the cells, so that gives it that crawly effect. So there are a lot of different styles in Schoolhouse Rock, and I'll just comment on that briefly. I think another reason for the longevity of Schoolhouse Rock is that everything is so different. We thought for a long while that was the biggest detriment to licensing or anything, because we had no continuing characters, which was the reason in the early 80s we started Schoolhouse Rocky and the little intro in an attempt to have some sort of a cohesive character. But we've used so many different people, 3 or 4 different songwriters and probably 3 or 4 different artists. And everybody's got a different look, so everything looks different. Even everything that I've done looks different because I don't have a style per se. So from I Got 6 to something else, it's very different. To unpack your adjectives. Yeah.
Yes, way back there.
Yeah, Bob, why the infinity thing at the end of the figure 8 song? Everything is going great. 1 times 8 is 8, 2 times 8 is 16. Boom, infinity.
How did I use infinity?
Down on the side.
Well, you just turn the 8 over and it's infinity. Like I say, I didn't want to write down to the kids, and I thought, who's heard of infinity? Maybe they haven't heard about it.
It's a wonderful car. Yeah.
Well, did you like it?
It scarred me for 20 years.
Every now and then.
Elementary schools, I say to children before I do that song, I say, or after I do it, well, who knows what infinity is? And their hands go up, and I get some intelligent answers and some dumb answers and all, but we sort of wig it out, and then I say, which other song from Multiplication Rock mentions infinity? And then they all think, and I think, and I've forgotten which one it is.
0. 3 is a magic number.
My hero, 0.
Oh.
Maybe.
0. I knew that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ad infinitum.
I got a thing for an infinity, I guess.
It was funny with infinity. Bobby would always have a little something in every song he brought in that we'd scratch our heads and say, what? There in Lucky 7 Samson, there's a lyric that says, anyone knows that who cares about 7? Well, I never knew anybody who really cared about 7. But there were always wonderful little things that Bob brought to the party.
You hadn't been at a dice game. Like
Not a gambler.
Right over here.
I have been watching Saturday morning cartoons for a while. Are you showing the original Schoolhouse Rocks now on Channel 7?
Yes, there's a pool of about 25 songs that are running, and probably 20 of those are from the traditional ones that you remember, and then we were doing the series on, trying to teach kids how to handle money and what money's all about. And so they're laced in there also. But it's the original stuff, yes.
But they used to be on as many as 7 times each weekend, and we're just on 2 times each week.
Bugs
each
Bunny.
Saturday now, yeah. On the Bugs Bunny Tweety Show. So it probably won't have quite as much of an impact on this generation, except these kids have videos too. So, and their parents are the ones that are going to put the kids in front. So Ron mentioned the circle being completed before with the CDs coming out, and what originally started as an audio idea and went into television is now back on audio. And also with the audience, the kids that grew up on it, like you guys, are becoming parents now, and now your kids are being. So that circle is closing too.
Yes, right here.
Did ABC or did you folks come up with the storylines in terms of let's deal with legal issues, let's deal with multiplication issues? The original thing you folks came up with in terms of multiplication and took it to ABC, and then from there, how did the creative process work back and forth with ABC?
It was collaborative then, yeah. Jenny is the one that really asked us to consider money and trying to teach kids about the value of money and how to handle it and interest and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yes, right here.
Did you guys have anything to do with the release of the cartoons or shorts on video recently? Because I was very excited when they came out and purchased them and made everybody watch them basically, but they've put things in between them. This thing with a bunch of kids and Cloris Leachman, and it's basically pretty obnoxious, and it seems to be kind of contra to the don't talk down to kids concept. I was wondering if you guys had anything to do with that, or is that just...
No, we didn't have anything to do with that, and
we were embarrassed by that.
Yeah, that was very embarrassing, because they're along with, after David having told Bobby not to write down, those things were produced actually without our even knowing about it. And the Cloris Leachman stuff was produced not by us, and it was just the opposite of our philosophical view of what Schoolhouse Rock should be. So we never liked those. And the new cassettes now that have been reissued, actually there's a very small amount of continuity, and it's Bobby, so that seems a little more consistent to us than Cloris.
There are new videos out now. Cloris Leachman is a wonderful actress, and I was once quoted by a paper saying she's horrible. And I just meant that she had no business being in those, as you said, but she was a wonderful nurse Diesel or whatever.
Yes, way back there.
I was just wondering if you could each identify which is your favorite Schoolhouse Rock episode and explain why.
Well, I have 2. I still, as a song, I think I like 3 as a magic number because that was the first song Bobby brought in. Animation, I think I like interjections best. And a lot of the kids' voices are my kids when they were little. And when you just heard my daughter Lauren say, "Darn, that's the end," she was 6 years old at the time, and she's 28 now, so.
The voice that said, "Wow, that's not fair, giving a guy a shot down there," grew up and became an advertising art director, and he designed the Tale of Mr. Morton, which is one of our new ones. So we're in our second generation of Tom Yohe's working on this.
And he works for David McCall now.
That's right.
So,
Yep. So
very incestuous. Right.
George, favorites?
Well, my favorite is 3 as a magic number, just for that. That was where we discovered magic, and that's always been my favorite.
David?
I think I like figure 8 because I think the music is just so absolutely stunningly beautiful. It's interesting that none of the music is rock.
Yeah.
Well, I figured you didn't even know what rock and roll was.
Right about that.
I didn't know much more myself. Well, my favorite is Lolly, 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 because I sing all 3 parts.
Radford?
Fireworks is mine because my kids are in that one. And also suffrage.
My daughter
Suffrage
worked
till
too.
suffrage.
My daughter's in My Hero Zero. Zero?
We loaded up our kids in these because
We all needed work.
No, actually, they
Price
weren't
was
paid
right.
for it, but we'd drag them in and promise them a hamburger at PJ Clark's. So,
Cheap labor.
Right.
Yes, way back there.
I was just curious what ad campaigns or particular commercials that some of this creative team is also responsible for, and whether you found that or Schoolhouse Rock more satisfying.
High karate.
Yeah, talk about the creation of high karate.
High karate, Tom and I met working on high karate. It was an idea. I'll tell you a little bit because there's an interesting backstory to it. But one of our biggest clients was a division of Pfizer called Leeming Paquin, and they had this stuff that smelled, and they wanted to name it and do. And it was at the time they were talking about putting an anti-acne ingredient in it, and I didn't do this with Tom. It was someone else, but the Beatle movie Help had just come out. And so we did photo storyboards with the Beatles, and we called it Help and wrote a jingle, and we were going to call it Help After Shave. And the client said, "You'll never get the Beatles." And we said, "Well, we might be able to. We'll try." So our casting department called England, and the Beatles said yes, they would do it. And they would do it for $1 million. Can you imagine? So we went back to Pfizer and said, "Guess what? The Beatles will do it for $1 million." "What? Are you serious? $1 million?" And so it died. And so, in desperation, I one day thought of this idea of an aftershave so powerful you had to put instructions on self-defense in every package. And Tom and I went around the world shooting high karate commercials where beautiful women attack men, which is my personal version of Manifest Destiny.
And don't ask him which he liked better.
David, any comparisons between advertising and the creation of Schoolhouse Rock?
No, I really said all I can think of on the subject. We had it was a wonderful advertising agency, and we had lots of clients ranging from Exxon to Mercedes-Benz to Pfizer, as George said, and a lot of other things. And the discipline of advertising, the work of advertising is it's interesting, it's fun, it's profitable, and but this was different, and we always knew it was different. When we first started it, I said, and Tom did the first storyboard. I said, "I think when I shuffle off this mortal coil, I want Schoolhouse Rock put on my gravestone." It was just different. It's in another world.
Well, I noticed that when you write a song, it's no particular length. It takes its time. When I wrote the multiplication songs, we were going to make a book and a record. And when we went to television, suddenly they all had to be 3 minutes. So I had to backtrack and do a lot of rewriting and snip off little pieces of film and audio sound. So that's the only similarity to me, that you're writing in a strict time frame. Every song had to be 3 minutes.
we have to pad occasionally. The crowd in there's one of the films, and I can't remember now. The Shot Heard Round the World, or one of those. The crowd cheers for 10 seconds at the end to bring it up to 3 minutes.
Well, the preamble had to be padded because it isn't long enough.
Right.
That's right. So it was sung twice.
That's right.
Well, we have time for one more question. Who would like to ask it? Right here?
Well, I have to say it's not a question, but I'm a big fan of Bob's. And for those of you that only know him from Schoolhouse Rock, he is a wonderful singer-songwriter, piano player, and does perform out here very rarely, not enough, at the Jazz Bakery. And last year, recorded a live album, which is going to be out soon.
Well, thank you, Mickey.
And see him the next time he's doing other stuff besides Schoolhouse Rock, because
What are you, tonight, Bob, what are you doing at the Troubadour?
Well, by the time I get to the Troubadour, the jazz will be finished, and I'll have to do just Schoolhouse Rock. And I'd love to stay and meet all of you, but I got a gig. Ross Tompkins is having all the fun.
Well, I want to thank our team. They came from New York to do this seminar. Thank you. And we all thank you for... Thank you.
Yeah.